History remembers kings for the empires they built, but sometimes queens are remembered for the monsters they unleashed. And few stories are darker than that of the queen whose obsession with purity and divine justice ignited one of the deadliest witch-hunting frenzies in European history. It began not with superstition, but with fear. Fear of sin, fear of chaos, and most dangerously, fear of losing control. Her name was Queen Anna of Saxony, though her legacy is far less royal than the portraits that survive. To the world, she appeared as a devout, God-fearing monarch. But behind the gilded doors of her palace, she became the architect of a nightmare that spread like wildfire through her kingdom, consuming thousands of innocent lives in the name of righteousness. To understand how one woman's obsession could twist an entire nation's soul, you have to step back to the late 1500s, a time when Europe was tearing itself apart between faith and fear. The Protestant Reformation had fractured the old order. The Church's grip was slipping, and monarchs were desperate to prove that divine authority still ran through their veins. Everywhere, suspicion took root. Witches were the perfect scapegoat. And Queen Anna, haunted by her own demons, personal tragedies, and the weight of divine expectation, became their most ruthless hunter. Her story begins quietly enough. Born into the Saxon royal house, Anna was raised under a strict Lutheran faith. Her father drilled her with one lesson above all, that a ruler's first duty was to preserve God's order. But the world she inherited was anything but orderly. Famine, disease, and war plagued her lands. The Rhine River overflowed, drowning entire villages. Crops withered, children starved, and whispers began to spread that the devil was walking among them. At first, Anna tried to rule through piety. She fasted, prayed for hours, and funded churches across Saxony. But the suffering only grew worse, and the people began to murmur that God had abandoned them. To a woman already teetering between faith and fanaticism, those whispers were unbearable. She became convinced that the kingdom's misfortunes were not natural. They were spiritual. Evil had to be rooted out. Someone had to be blamed. Then came the moment that changed everything. In 1589, her only surviving child, Prince Frederick, fell gravely ill. Physicians were powerless. His body burned with fever for weeks until one night, Anna awoke screaming that she had seen a shadowy woman standing over her son's bed. The next morning, Frederick was dead. That was the spark. Anna declared the child had been murdered, not by poison or plague, but by witchcraft. Her grief turned to rage, and her rage became policy. She issued a royal decree that every village in Saxony was to be searched for witches, every woman suspected of charms, herbs, or strange dreams interrogated. Within weeks, the first trials began. But what started as grief-driven vengeance quickly spiraled into obsession. At first, the accused were poor women, midwives, widows, healers. But as the frenzy grew, no one was safe. Entire families were dragged from their homes. Accusations spread like plague, passed between neighbors like curses. A glance, a whisper, even a nightmare could condemn a person to the flames. Queen Anna personally attended the first trials. Chroniclers describe her sitting behind a curtain, veiled in black, silently watching as the accused begged for mercy. When one woman confessed under torture, Anna ordered her burned that same night, so her soul could not return to curse the living. The flames reflected in the queen's eyes as the crowd chanted prayers. But it didn't stop the nightmares. Anna's mind began to unravel. She started seeing witchcraft everywhere. In her servants' gestures, in the patterns of birds across the sky, even in her own reflection. She believed Satan was sending witches into her court disguised as loyal attendants. One night, she ordered every maid in her palace stripped and examined for the devil's mark. Her counselors begged her to stop, warning that the trials were tearing the kingdom apart. But Anna would not listen. Better to burn 100 witches than let one demon live, she said. Her words spread through the land like scripture. And soon, other nobles followed her example. By the mid-1590s, entire towns were staging mass witch burnings. In the city of Quedlinburg alone, 133 women were executed in 1 month. The Rhine Valley glowed with fire at night. Travelers wrote that you could smell the smoke for miles, that the rivers ran black with ash. Behind it all, in her cold marble palace, Queen Anna continued to pray. To her, this was purification. To her people, it was apocalypse. By the dawn of the 1590s, Saxony had become a kingdom consumed by its queen's obsession. The witch hunts that began as an act of vengeance had evolved into something far larger, a holy bureaucracy of fear. Across the land, local magistrates built special courts, executioners were hired full-time, and preachers thundered from pulpits about the devil's army hidden in plain sight. The machine of persecution needed fuel, and Queen Anna provided it. From her throne, she signed decree after decree authorizing torture in the pursuit of divine truth. Her private chapel, once a sanctuary of peace, was now lined with the confessions of the condemned, written in trembling, blood-stained ink. Each confession confirmed what Anna already believed, that her enemies were everywhere, and that her crusade was righteous. Her counselors feared her more than they feared heresy. One, a physician named Ulrich Brenner, dared to suggest that the queen's visions were the result of grief and illness, not divine revelation. He disappeared the next day. Rumor said his body was found floating in the Elbe River, his mouth stuffed with pages torn from the Bible. And yet, to the people, Anna was not a tyrant, she was a saint. Chroniclers wrote that peasants traveled for days just to touch the hem of her gown, believing it carried divine power. Merchants sold charms inscribed with her initials, claiming they warded off witchcraft. The irony was almost cosmic. The very queen who burned women for superstition had become the center of a new one. In towns like Leipzig and Dresden, trials became public festivals. Entire squares filled with spectators eager to watch the cleansing fires. Children were given small wooden crosses to hold as priests marched the condemned through the streets. The accused were paraded on carts, hair shaved, bodies bruised from the rack, faces pale with terror. Some recited psalms. Others screamed curses. But all met the same fate when the torches touched the pyres. The queen's obsession reached beyond her borders. Neighboring rulers, seeing the political advantage in aligning with Anna's crusade, began their own purges. The Elector of Bavaria sent her a letter praising her holy zeal and requesting copies of her legal procedures. Within years, her methods were being replicated across Central Europe, from Saxony to Austria, from Bohemia to Würzburg. It was here that the witch hunts transformed from isolated madness into a continent-wide epidemic. Scholars, theologians, even jurists began writing manuals explaining how to identify and interrogate witches. One such text, The Fire of Virtue, written under Anna's patronage, became infamous. It described in clinical detail how to extract confessions through measured divine pressure. The author claimed that God himself guided the torturer's hand. Anna had built a theology of terror. The church, at first hesitant, realized the witch trials had a strategic value. They reinforced obedience. They silenced dissent. And they filled coffers, too, since the property of the condemned was confiscated by the crown and shared with the church. Suddenly, everyone had a reason to believe in witches. But not everyone bowed to the hysteria. In the university town of Wittenberg, a small group of scholars began to speak out. They argued that witchcraft trials were destroying Christian virtue. Among them was a young theologian named Matthias Keller, whose fiery pamphlets denounced the queen's decrees as satanic in their righteousness. The response was swift. Keller was arrested and accused of consorting with demons. His trial was held in the Cathedral of Dresden itself, under direct royal supervision. Witnesses claimed that, as he was tortured, he cried out not to God, but to reason. "If truth is holy," he shouted, "why must it be beaten from the mouth?" He was burned the next day. Word of his death spread like a plague of its own. To some, it confirmed the queen's power. To others, it marked the moment when her crusade crossed the line between justice and madness. The more she hunted witches, the more she saw them everywhere. Nightmares tormented her, visions of pale faces in the dark, whispering her name. She began performing nightly rituals, lighting hundreds of candles to repel darkness. Palace servants described her wandering the halls barefoot, muttering prayers. Her eyes glazed with exhaustion. She started keeping the ashes of the executed in glass vials, labeling them proof of cleansing. Those closest to her whispered that the queen no longer hunted witches out of faith, but out of fear. Fear that if she stopped, The evil she claimed to destroy would turn against her. By 1597, her courts had executed over 3,000 people. The land was broken. Villages stood empty. Trade collapsed. Even her bishops began to doubt her. And yet, she pressed on, claiming that the devil grows most furious when he is about to be defeated. But it wasn't the devil who was about to fall, it was her. Because somewhere deep in the forests of Saxony, a rebellion was brewing. Farmers and townsfolk, driven past the point of despair, began to whisper another kind of heresy, that the true witch sat on the throne. The rebellion began not with swords, but with whispers. In the small market town of Eilenburg, a rumor spread that Queen Anna herself had made a pact with the devil, that her power came not from God, but from darkness. It began as a drunken joke in a tavern, but within a week it had crossed the forests and rivers, carried by frightened tongues. Peasants began carving strange marks above their doors, not to ward off witches this time, but to keep the queen's spirit away. When word of this rumor reached Dresden, Anna erupted. Her paranoia, already festering, now bloomed into full madness. She ordered the entire town of Eilenburg placed under investigation. Over 100 people, men, women, even children, were rounded up and accused of witchcraft and treason. Her agents reported that Anna herself demanded to witness their interrogation. Witnesses described what happened next, as if it were a nightmare come alive. In the castle's underground vaults, torches hissed against damp stone walls. The accused were dragged before the queen, some screaming, others too weak to speak. She asked them one question again and again, "Who sent you?" When one young woman, a baker's daughter, whispered that she had only prayed for mercy, Anna struck her across the face and shouted, "Mercy is for the innocent, not for Satan's brides." Under torture, dozens confessed to impossible crimes, flying through storms, summoning wolves, cursing crops. Their confessions were nonsense, but they were exactly what Anna wanted to hear. It was proof. Proof that her war was holy. Proof that her son's death, her sleepless nights, her terror, all of it had meaning. And yet, even as the fires burned brighter, Anna's health began to fade. She suffered fainting spells and fits of trembling. Her physicians warned her to rest, but she refused, claiming the devil attacked her whenever she slept. Servants whispered that she kept a small silver cross pressed to her chest at all times and refused to bathe, convinced that witches could curse her through water. It was during this period that the chroniclers first began to note something truly strange. Witnesses said that the queen's prayers grew darker. Instead of begging for deliverance, she began demanding vengeance. One courtier recorded that she spent entire nights kneeling before a crucifix, whispering, "Let them burn. Let them all burn." Then came the summer of 1598, the summer historians later called the season of smoke. Across Saxony, witch trials reached their fever pitch. The queen's inquisitors, armed with new authority, swept through villages like locusts. In a single week, over 400 people were executed in the region of Meissen. Entire families disappeared. Children were taken to orphanages run by the church, their parents branded as witches. The skies turned black from the constant burning of bodies. But even as the pyres multiplied, so did the queen's enemies. The rebellion that began in whispers now took form. A secret network of priests, merchants, and peasants began plotting to end the terror. They called themselves the Sons of the Thorn, named after the crown of Christ, believing they were chosen to stop the madness that had corrupted the throne. One of their leaders was a former judge named Heinrich Osterwald, who had once presided over the witch trials himself. After condemning dozens to death, he had realized the truth. Every confession was coerced, every trial predetermined. In a secret letter to his brother, he wrote, "The queen hunts the devil, but it is she who brings him." The Sons of the Thorn began spreading pamphlets across Saxony, accusing the queen of using witchcraft herself. They claimed she performed dark rituals in the palace, using the ashes of the executed to maintain her youth and power. The accusations were dangerous lies, or perhaps dangerous truths. Anna's court was now a nest of spies and informants. No one trusted anyone. Servants vanished overnight. Her chief advisor, Baron Klaus von Ehrenfeld, was found dead in his chambers with a note pinned to his chest reading, "Even angels fall." But the queen only grew more determined. She began holding secret midnight masses where priests chanted prayers to cleanse the air of the devil's breath. She ordered every church bell in Saxony to ring simultaneously at dusk to confuse the witches' spirits. The entire kingdom pulsed to a rhythm of fear. When a lightning storm struck Dresden, setting part of the palace roof ablaze, Anna took it as a sign that Satan himself had entered the royal halls. That night, she made a chilling decree. Any servant who dreamed of fire was to be arrested as a witch. Dozens were seized by dawn. By now, her face had grown pale and hollow, her hair streaked with gray. The once beautiful queen, who had ruled with elegance, now looked like a specter of her own making. Her people called her the Ash Queen. But the rebellion was closing in. In the shadows, the Sons of the Thorn made their final plan, to expose her crimes not through assassination, but through revelation. They would reveal to the world the truth behind her witch trials, the false confessions, the bribed priests, the innocent burned alive. All they needed was proof, and there was one man who could provide it, a former inquisitor who had fled the queen's service. And he carried with him her greatest secret. The man who held the queen's secret was Brother Matthias Gerhardt, a Dominican inquisitor once favored by Anna herself. For years he had served as her confessor and spiritual weapon, the priest who heard the cries of the condemned and called them holy. But something inside him had broken. The breaking point came during the interrogation of a 12-year-old girl named Greta, accused of summoning storms that ruined the queen's harvest. Matthias had watched as her small body was tied to the rack. Her bones cracked before she spoke a word. When she finally screamed that she would confess to anything, he felt a voice, not divine, but human, whisper in his mind, "This is not God's work. This is yours." That night, he left the chamber, blood still on his hands, and fled into the woods. For months, he hid in monasteries and barns, haunted by visions of flames and the faces of the dead. Then he found the Sons of the Thorn. They promised him redemption if he would tell the world the truth about the queen. By the spring of 1599, Matthias returned to Dresden disguised as a pilgrim. In his satchel he carried documents, court decrees, torture orders, and something worse, the queen's private journal. The entries were written in her own hand, each page more unhinged than the last. "I see them in the walls," one line read. "The witches whisper from a stone. They tell me my son still burns." Another, "If I stop the purging, he will never rest." To the Sons of the Thorn, this was proof enough. They planned to release the writings to the public at the Midsummer Festival, when nobles from across Saxony would gather in Dresden. It would be the queen's undoing, not through rebellion, but revelation. But Anna was always one step ahead of her enemies. Her spies caught wind of a conspiracy, though not its source. She ordered a new round of arrests, and the capital descended into chaos once again. Soldiers scoured the city, dragging anyone suspected of disloyalty before the palace gates. Inside her chamber, Anna no longer resembled a ruler. Her body was frail, her fingers ink-stained from endless writing. She barely slept, convinced that Satan himself now wore human faces among her court. She demanded nightly exorcisms, even as her priests hesitated. One of them, Father Ruiz, a Jesuit sent by Rome to observe the Saxon trials, recorded that Anna's eyes shone like embers, as she spoke of divine voices guiding her. "She believes herself chosen," he wrote, "not by God, but by something she cannot name." The night before the festival, a storm rolled over Dresden. Thunder shook the cathedral towers. Lightning illuminated the city like an omen. In the streets below, the Sons of the Thorn gathered their courage. Brother Matthias stood among them, clutching the queen's journal, knowing that by sunrise he might hang for treason. When the festival began, the palace was filled with music and incense. Nobles in jeweled robes drank wine, while priests offered blessings for another year of cleansing. The queen entered the hall draped in black, a diamond crucifix glinting at her throat. Her presence silenced the crowd. Then, from the cathedral steps outside, a voice rang out, "My queen, I bring you your own truth." Matthias appeared, drenched from the rain, holding her journal high for all to see. Guards rushed forward, but the crowd had already begun to murmur. He opened the book and began to read. The child burned still. The witches laughed through the walls. only fire can drown them. Gasps rippled through the hall. Some crossed themselves, others stepped back from the queen, as if she carried disease. Matthias continued reading page after page, his voice rising with conviction. Let them burn so I may sleep. Let them burn until I am clean. Anna rose to her feet, trembling. Her voice cracked like thunder. Lies. Satan's lies, she screamed. This man served the devil. Arrest him. But no one moved. The guards hesitated. The nobles stared. Even the priests seemed frozen between fear and revelation. Matthias dropped the journal at her feet. Your Majesty, he said softly, the devil you hunt is the one who whispers in your own prayers. For a long moment there was silence. Then Anna screamed, a raw, animal sound that echoed through the marble halls. She lunged for a torch from the altar, flames licking her hand, and hurled it toward Matthias. The fire struck a tapestry and spread with terrifying speed. Panic erupted. Nobles fled, priests shouted, smoke filled the room. In the chaos, Matthias vanished. Some said he escaped into the crowd, others that he perished in the blaze. The queen was pulled from the burning hall by her guards, coughing and half-mad. Witnesses claimed she kept whispering her son's name through the smoke. By dawn, the palace chapel was reduced to ash. When the fire was finally out, the queen's journal was gone, but the rumor had already done its work. Across Saxony, the people whispered the truth. Their savior had become the very evil she claimed to destroy. The fire that consumed the palace that night didn't just destroy stone and timber. It burned away the illusion of sanctity that had protected Queen Anna for years. By morning, Dresden was a city divided between those who still believed she was God's chosen purifier and those who saw her now for what she had become, a tyrant cloaked in prayer. The queen emerged from the ashes alive, but changed. Her hair had turned completely white. Her voice, once commanding, now trembled as if something inside her had cracked. She retreated to her private quarters, refusing to see anyone but her confessor. The people waited for her next decree, expecting vengeance or another purge. Instead, there was silence. For weeks, smoke still lingered over the city, a ghost of the inferno that had ended her reign of terror. The Sons of the Thorn, once hunted like animals, now moved freely through Saxony's towns, spreading word of the queen's downfall. They read copies of her journal aloud in marketplaces, showing her handwriting to anyone who doubted. She hunted demons, they said, but she was the only one possessed. The power structure that had fed the witch trials began to collapse. Local magistrates, suddenly fearful of their own survival, stopped issuing arrest warrants. Torture chambers were quietly emptied. Executioners fled or turned to begging in the streets. The fires that had burned night after night for a decade finally went cold. But for Queen Anna, peace never came. Inside her palace, she began to waste away. Her nights were filled with screams that echoed through the corridors, waking the servants who dared remain. They said she still spoke to her dead son, that she heard his voice in the crackle of dying candles. Sometimes, she was found kneeling on the cold floor of her chapel, surrounded by extinguished tapers, whispering prayers backwards as if trying to undo them. Her confessor, Father Ruiz, wrote that she would spend hours staring into mirrors, claiming she could see the faces of the witches she had burned. They stare at me, she told them, and they are not angry. They are waiting. Outside, the church tried to distance itself from her madness. Letters from Rome condemned the excessive zeal of the Saxon trials. Bishops who had once praised her began to rewrite history, claiming they had always doubted her visions. But it was too late. The damage was irreversible. Saxony's economy was ruined. Entire towns were empty. Orphans filled the monasteries. The air itself seemed haunted. Travelers wrote that the land felt cursed, that even forests refused to grow where the pyres had stood. Then, one winter morning in 1601, a palace servant entered the queen's chamber and found her seated before the window, staring into the snow. Her body was rigid, her hands clasped around a silver cross. She was dead. No one could say how long she had been sitting there. When her body was prepared for burial, the attendants discovered something strange. The skin around her fingers was burned, as though she had held the cross in a flame. Her last act, perhaps, was an attempt to purify herself the way she had purified so many others. The court declared a day of mourning, but there were no tears in the streets, no processions of mourning, no prayers of gratitude. The people buried her name in silence. Within a year of her death, Saxony issued an edict banning witch trials altogether. The fires she had ignited finally died, smothered by exhaustion and shame. But the echoes of her reign lingered across Europe. Her methods, the interrogations, the confessions under torture, the idea that fear could preserve faith, spread beyond her borders long after her body was gone. Historians later called it the Queen's Contagion, a fever of fanaticism that swept across the continent. Within 2 generations, tens of thousands more would die in witch hunts inspired, directly or indirectly, by her reign. Her obsession had outlived her, passed from one frightened ruler to the next, disguised as righteousness. Centuries later, when the last witch trials ended, scholars looked back on her story and saw a warning written in ash, that fear, when sanctified by power, becomes a disease with no cure. Even now, portraits of Queen Anna hang in a few forgotten halls, her eyes dark, her expression unreadable. To some, she is a symbol of devotion gone wrong. To others, a reminder that tyranny can wear the face of faith. If you stand close enough to those old paintings, you can see faint cracks running through the paint, as if the image itself is decaying, struggling to contain the weight of what she did. They say at night, when the light flickers across her face, the paint around her lips seems to curve into a faint smile, not of joy, but of recognition. Because every age has its witch hunts. Every age finds new devils to burn. And every age gives birth to its own queen who believes she's doing God's work.